Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Mike Carell are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
And welcome back to our series. Today, we're in part 2 of Many Layers of Sex and Touch in Modern Life. This is a 3-part series, and we're going to talk about many different things. If you tuned in to last week, you know we peeled back the history of taboos and around touch. Today, we're delving into a little bit deeper. What is the primal importance of touch? And what happens when healthy touch is in short supply? With me is Dr. Michael Murphy. Hello, Dr. Murphy.
It's great to be back with you again, and I really look forward to discussing this topic in more detail. You know, it's such a complex and powerful issue. Touching, intimacy, closeness, warmth, they all go together, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the weeds about that this morning.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the primal need for touch. Human touch is more than just a comfort thing. You know, it's actually a foundational language that, predates words, predates just about everything. And seminal research like that of I don't know if she's a doctor, but Ashley Montague wrote a book called Touching, The Human Significance of the Skin. And that demonstrates the physical connection is essential to survival. Without it, infants fail to thrive, as acknowledged. And as we move into adulthood, the importance of touch can fade, even as our culture becomes saturated with sexualized images and messages. Actual consensual touch becomes rare. And at times, it's stigmatized and criminalized, criticized, judged, and all kinds of things that we're just afraid to have to deal with. Can you share a little bit about that, Dr. Murphy?
Oh, certainly. One of the things that we think about with regard to touch is, of course, sex. And we associate, perhaps to an excessive degree, touching with sexual contact, when in fact, the vast majority of the touching that most of us should do and need on an everyday basis is just regular daily human contact with another person or being. You know, why do we have animals? One of the reasons we have animals, dogs, for example, is that we love to be touched and touch them and rub them and all that stuff, and they give us a sense of warmth and acceptance.
Unconditionally.
They give lots and lots of unconditional love, and it's a wonderful thing. You know, and that's why, you know, having animals is so popular, because they don't judge us, they don't reject us, they don't criticize us. They just want our attention and love, and they're more than willing to give that themselves. And that's just really healthy. So in fact, you see people who have pets, they do better. They do better in terms of their level of vitality, their level of activity, their level of mood, the improvement of their mood. So it really is important to have some understanding and awareness of this language of the skin, and that touching actually is its own language that we need to pay attention to, just like we pay attention to our verbal language, because touching is something that if we choose to ignore it, as you mentioned, you know, there's been a lot of studies that children who are not touched suffer from, you know, some kind of feelings of deprivation, maybe reduced mood, a sense of isolation and anxiety, fear. But touch is something that really activates a lot of hormones in our body that really allows us to feel more calm and more safe in this world. And we all know, if you look at the news at all, you feel like, hey, this world is not a safe place. Well, how is that affecting our children and our kids and kids in school, that kind of thing, who are looking on their phones constantly, being subjected to these images and this information that says that the world is a dangerous place?
Yeah.
Well, if the world seems to be a dangerous place, we are then in need of comfort, to be reassured that in fact, the world is not as dangerous as it may appear, and we're
Right.
okay and we're safe. And there are powerful people in this world, namely your parents, family members, friends, neighbors, who can really contribute to your sense of safety. And one of the ways you do that is through touch. So, so I think you're an expert in that, Mike, with your practice, working with people every day in terms of really helping people to learn how to accept touch and to negotiate about touch.
Absolutely. I was going to bring up that question. What is it about our culture? What is it about us that restricts the opportunity and the free flow of uh, tactile communication, if you will? Um, and as men, we are raised to think that it's not okay to just go ahead and touch people, hug people, embrace people or caress them. And, you can get into trouble in today's society if you touch the wrong person. And so it's important for us to realize that at some point we need actually be vulnerable and express our need for touch and to do so in a non-threatening way. I think that as we grow up, men kind of feel like you're not allowed. Uh, and it says nothing to the fact that we still feel the need to touch, to be touched as well. In the line of work that I do, I have to teach people that touch in and of itself is a healthy, valuable thing that actually has virtuous qualities. And the idea that touch is either sinful or bad or nasty or whatever can cause us to feel a furtiveness about engaging in touch with another person. So what we need to do is retrain ourselves. We need to reframe the idea and the need. And sometimes we have to be vulnerable to do that. You know,
That's a great point, Mike. I really think that the way that touch gets associated with s- sensational forms of crime, like we hear about sexual offenders, and we think that that's going to happen all the time, and it really is, in fact, quite rare. It does occur, certainly, and it needs to be addressed. But I think that um, the sensationalizing of negative incidents of touch tend to get generalized and then reduce our some people's willingness to accept or welcome touch, just ordinary day-to-day touch, a hand on an elbow, a hand on a shoulder,
yeah,
just sort of shaking hands, acts of contact that are meant to communicate to another human being that we welcome them, that we care about them, and we
yeah,
want to be connected to them literally, physically, through some little gesture that allows us to be in contact with their skin. One of the things you said about men and contact and touch is that a lot of the work that men have done over the course of the centuries is uh, the kind of work that reduces the sensitivity of the skin, right?
yeah,
So you develop calluses, literally. If you talk to a farmer, a mechanic, a carpenter, people whose hands become very, very, very callous, that really reduces the sensitivity of the skin, literally.
right.
So it's something to think about in terms of, really men feeling more and more sensually isolated because literally their skin surface is not processing touch as
Right.
efficiently as it used to.
It's interesting because there is an emotional counterpart or spiritual counterpart to that too, if you will. Because as men, we're forced to suck it up, so to speak. and to not express our sensitivity. And doing that over and over and over can create emotional calluses as well as the physical. You know what I mean? In the kind of work that you do, we do emotional work with ourselves, with being out in society, being on the job site, and just being openly disclosing all of our sensitivities is not a good idea. And so as a result, we continue to do that kind of work of suppressing those emotions, that those modes of expression, and we form emotional calluses as well that kind of lead us into an opportunity where maybe we're not responding the way we ought to be able to engage with our partner. Maybe we're not um, uh, uh, sensitive to the cues that are being given to us, or the invitations, or the request for touch, from our partner or somebody else. A lot has to do with those calluses. We don't feel it as we would had we been in an environment where it was always allowed and always appropriate.
Yeah, that's a great point. How we tend to step away from touch. I mean, touch involves vulnerability. I mean, we're opening ourselves to somebody, we're allowing them to be close to us. So when you let someone come within our circle, our little personal circle, our boundary, our personal boundary, we open
Mhm.
our boundary to let somebody come inside, and we need to let them come inside that boundary in order for them to be able to touch us. So
That's
we have
right.
to kind of make a decision to welcome others, to create some kind of signal that lets other people know that we're open to them coming inside our personal space, which generally kind of extends maybe 6 inches or a foot, or maybe with some people even 2 feet from their skin, their actual body. So
Right.
some people kind of welcome people inside that boundary, right? And some people are very uncomfortable to let people come inside that boundary. So negotiating that whole process can be complex, and it really requires communication. So I think one of the things that you're bringing up and that you have done in your work, Mike, is helping people to understand that process of communicating about the boundary and
Yeah.
touching and how close you want to be and how close you can allow somebody to be and how you can set appropriate boundaries so you feel safe at the same time as you can open those boundaries and sort of allow people to be close to you and
Yeah.
therefore feed your need to be touched, because we really do need to be touched in order to be healthy. And our society just sort of ignores that or lets it go or sensationalizes it
Right.
or just captures it with the association with sexuality,
Right.
which
And
really is
it's
part of it,
it's
but not all of it. Yeah.
it's not enough to acknowledge that society has those restrictions and even creates taboos for us, but how we take ownership of that fact makes a big difference too. Because even though society may frown on it, we may be able to create a new communication, a new awareness for people. That even though it may be dangerous to get more than 6 feet from a person, there are incidences where you do need to, and it has a healthy outcome. You know, I remember a funny story when you were talking about our boundaries. My mother-in-law was suffering with dementia, and we had gone to visit her at home one day, and I got close to give her a hug, and then I remembered maybe I should ask permission, and so I had my hands on her shoulders and I said, "Can I give you a hug?" And she goes, "You may as well. You got close enough." And it was just like, I've already entered the boundary. You may as well give me a hug now. So it's interesting because these are things that are deep rooted in us. We have to realize that we're the ones who are in charge of our communication, both incoming and outgoing. How do we interpret what people are trying to say to us? How do we interpret? Are we even aware of the cues they're sending us? And
Yeah.
if so, then we need to make sure by communicating what we think they mean. And there's so many ways to communicate. It's not always verbal. Our body language, our stance, the little micro decisions that we make in when we're engaging with someone are
Right.
all
One of the things that
unique.
you see is that all mammals need to be touched. If you've
Yep.
had the opportunity to see mammals, and it's certainly not great to have them be in cages, but they're touching each other all the time, and they really seek that out, and they need it, and that's a form of kind of daily nurturance and
Yeah.
care.
And if you notice with your pets, when they don't want you to touch them anymore, they'll just walk away.
Right.
They won't unless they're injured. If they're injured, they may bark or snap it or snap at you. We're going to talk some more about that, the scarcity of touch, when we come back from our commercial break. Please don't go away.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
And welcome back. A big question. Is there a scarcity of healthy touch in the world today? Many will say there is. And, interestingly enough, it's something that we need to take a look at, and why, and how are we going to handle the scarcity of touch? Dr. Murphy has a beautiful poem that touches exactly on that to share with it. And so just a little treat for you. Sit back and listen to this wonderful poem. Dr. Murphy.
So I'm pleased to be able to read this for you. This is a lovely poem that is included in Ashley Montague's book, The Human Significance of the Skin. And it really, I think, talks about one person's feelings about the importance and value of touch and the importance of touch. So this is a poem by a woman called Donna Swanson, and it's called Minnie Remembers. God, my hands are old. I've never said that out loud before, but they are. I was so proud of them once. They were soft, like the velvet smoothness of a firm, ripe peach. Now the softness is more like worn-out sheets or withered leaves. When did these slender, graceful hands become gnarled, shrunken claws? When, God? They lie here in my lap, naked reminders of this worn-out body that has served me too well. How long has it been since someone touched me? 20 years? 20 years I've been a widow, respected, smiled at, but never touched. Never held so close that loneliness was blotted out. I remember how my mother used to hold me, God, when I was hurt in spirit or flesh. She would gather me close, stroke my silky hair, and caress my back with her warm hands. Oh God, I'm so lonely. I remember the first boy who ever kissed me. We were both so new at that. The taste of young lips and popcorn, the feeling inside of mysteries. Oh, I remember Hank and the babies. How else can I remember them but together? Out of the fumbling, awkward attempts of new lovers came the babies. And as they grew, so did our love. And God, Hank didn't seem to mind if my body thickened and faded a little. He still loved it and touched it. And we didn't mind if we were no longer beautiful. And the children hugged me a lot. Oh God, I'm lonely. God, why didn't we raise the kids to be silly and affectionate as well as dignified and proper? You see, they do their duty. They drive up in their fine cars. They come to my room and pay their respects. They chatter brightly and reminisce, but they don't touch me. They call me mom or mother or grandma, never Minnie. My mother called me Minnie. So did my friends. Hank called me Minnie, too, but they're gone, and so is Minnie. Only Grandma is here, and God, she's lonely.
Wow.
So that's an example of just a beautiful poem about an elderly person who deeply misses the meaning and the significance of human touch and how we all call out for that. We cry out for it, and she is crying out for it with that poem to re-experience the wonderful sensations that usually accompany healthy touch.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this before, how most of the best memories of our lives, if we think back on our lives, the best times, oftentimes they involve some time when we had a touching, literally touching, physically touching
Yeah.
encounter with another human being for a
Yeah.
sustained period of time. And we think that is bliss. That's as close to bliss as we come oftentimes in this life. And so, the value of touch just really needs to be emphasized. And I think, the work that you do, Mike, to try to get people to be able to negotiate that
Yeah.
complex process sometimes of it actually learning how to invite someone in to touch and to, speak the language of touch, to negotiate with each other.
Absolutely. As much as the absence of healthy touch shapes our lives, the way we think, the way we emote, the decisions that we make, um, it deprives us of emotional nourishment and communal intimacy. As a society, we need to know how to communicate with each other and a level of appropriate intimacy that we can have with members of our community that are not necessarily our intimate our intimate partners. So Casey Vasily wrote a book called where she mentions what they refer to as the resource deserts, and what that refers to are the environments where individuals lack access, or not only to the geographic resources, but clinics, educators, also social and psychological um, supports the idea that it's necessary for healthy sexual development to have that ability, that freedom of expression, and that invited touch, enthusiastic touch among people. But it's also important for us to have a right attitude about the appropriateness. It's not all restrictive, and sometimes we don the mindset of, well, what I'm doing is what I propose to do is wrong. Say you wanted to give someone a hug and you wanted to touch their shoulder, and you're a professional person, you just fear stay away from it. Kind of like that restriction that we have that gives us the emotional calluses. It's important to understand that just as our need for food is important, and we would invite people to eat with us, we would invite people, we would share a meal with somebody. Touch is the same. It's a very basic need, and there's no need for us to misinterpret that need.
Right. One of
When
the
we,
things that I think it's important to talk about with that, Mike, is the negotiation of touch. And I think that,
yeah,
you know, one of the things that I've done with many people, as I believe you have too, is meta communication. So having a conversation with someone about how they actually want to talk about touch, just like you talk about, hey, what kind of food do we want to buy at the supermarket this week? Should we buy mainly vegetables or should we get something else? And what should be the variety of our appetite, this week for food? And yet we tend less to do that with regard to physical contact, even
yeah,
though the need is just as fundamental, just as
yeah,
necessary. We need tactile nutrients just as robustly as we need healthy food. And now
yeah.
we're paying a lot more attention to the the healthiness of our food products
Oh
here
yeah,
in this country
yeah.
now. We're caring about that, and I think we need to take the next step to where we begin to talk about, the healthiness and the robustness of our appetites for touch and contact, and how
You know,
powerful that affects our health.
yeah, yeah. As a society, we have learned how to sublimate, if you will, our need for touch. And believe it or not, it takes place by sports as one thing, where you have those contact sports where you're actually contacting and working with people. It's a form of touch that we have legitimized, that we have made acceptable, and women are even engaging it more than they used to. And these are all basic instinctual needs that we have found ways to access, albeit in those indirect ways. So, if you can imagine legitimizing healthy a healthy caress, with the right people and the right environment, and the ability and power that we have as individuals to consecrate a context. In other words, create a time and space that's dedicated for those things, so that we don't have to feel the furtiveness and of engaging in that way, and we don't have to feel the emptiness of going without.
No, it's interesting that you use the word consecrate, which actually is kind of a sacred word, a spiritual
It
word,
is absolutely.
for rendering something holy.
That's
And
right.
really, touch uh, can be a sacred process in
It
terms
is.
of the encounter with another human being, the holding of another human being. I mean, fundamentally, unconsciously, hopefully, we all remember on some deep level how we were held by our loved ones soon after birth or during the periods of our infancy and early life. And do we have the holding process? Can we remember deeply inside ourselves what it feels like to be held? Those are holy moments in a way that are consecrated in our memories as
Yeah.
sacred. And we can recall them, and that creates a foundation for people of
Yeah.
healthy and uh, healthy engagement with other human beings.
Yeah,
So it's
it's really an important thing, and I want to talk some more when we come back from commercial break, because we can remember, like, as you mentioned, those incidents that can actually restore the quality of being touched when we come back. Stay with us.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
And welcome back. We're going to be talking about a number of things, especially with regard to the ability to remember and reconstruct those instances of loving touch and comforting touch. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about how we even got there in the first place. You know, as you well know, there's a thing called objectification and the consequences that come with people feeling objectified when it comes to intimate encounters. Fredrickson and Roberts uh, came up with the objectification theory, which reveals how societal norms can actually reduce the human body, especially those of women and gender minorities, to mere objects of scrutiny and consumption. You know, this objectification undermines our capacity to really feel true, genuine joy. It also undermines our capacity to heal and to connect with people. And even therapeutic touch becomes suspect, so that it's now entangled in shame, anxiety, furtiveness, and people begin to internalize this uncertainty about what kinds of touch are appropriate, are acceptable, and even good for us. So, what that happens is it results in a deep disconnect from our own bodies, kind of like the calluses that we talked about, Dr. Murphy, right? And have and incorporate that into our lived experience. So this cycle perpetuates itself, and the objectification breeds shame. Shame erodes pleasure, and soon touch itself feels too risky to engage in. So that's where we're at. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Murphy?
One of the things that I wanted to talk about is my experience in the past as what's called a qualified examiner. So a qualified examiner is a person who is sort of similar to a medical examiner, but for sexually related crimes and aberrations of conduct. So when a person is convicted of a sexually related crime, they become what's called a sex offender. They may serve time in a prison. I worked in that prison as a psychologist for many years and completed many, many hundreds of evaluations of people who had been convicted of sexually related crimes as to their current dangerousness. So I have a lot of experience and thoughts about, the level of sexual risk and how that issue of objectification plays a role in sexual offending. And I think that's just a critical topic in terms of how we associate touching with negative outcomes. So it's interesting. The Mothers of Inventions musical group of long ago, you may remember, had this song in which they just said sex and violence over and over and over again. And it was sort of a sarcastic comment on their part, just how much of our attention and our concern and our ads and everything in our society is focused around either sex or violence, and how sex and violence can become fused together in pathological and maladaptive ways. So we really need to be vigilant about that, because that's, though it's fortunately usually a relatively rare event, it's something that when it occurs, it can be really traumatic and difficult.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah,
right. So I think one of the things that we did in those settings was try to increase people's insight into their motivations. So, right. So all of us have a degree probably of what we call sexual drive. The need for contact, the need for intimacy can be thought of as an instinct. It's sort of a hardwired impulse that we have, that we're born with, and that emerges more as we grow older and become adolescents and young adults. We seek more and more, or are more aware of that drive, that need for closeness. And that's what sort of motivates us to move toward pair bonding with another person in the course and process of creating a family. And that sort of continues the human race. So this drive for intimacy and touch is integrally organized around the continuation of our species, even. And
So in the
without that, we kind of lose, we're in trouble. Right.
I have a question about the forensic evaluation of what is criminal and what is not. With that, I know there are a number of people that, especially having worked in institutions where they're criminalized and they're vilified, and they get to a point where, um, let's just say, they have a sex offense on their record, and with that on their record is a stigma. So the person automatically is fearful about even expressing any kind of need for intimacy now, because they're a labeled sex offender. Where do you draw the line between what is criminally, forbidden, and what is socially appropriate or even intimately appropriate? You
Right.
know,
So that's the $64,000 question, really, is clarifying that very issue. And so it brings out once again the issue of communication. That obviously any contact that we have with a human being, with another human being of an intimate nature, has to be consensual. So you need to negotiate with that person around their willingness to participate in that activity. And when you do it forcibly or you violate those boundaries without the other person's consent, that's a sexual crime. And then, that's the kind of activity that causes harm to others, and also gets the perpetrator in legal trouble for good reason. So you
you
really
know,
need. So it brings up again the absolute essential nature of our having a language of the skin, if you will, a language of
yeah,
touching communication in terms of our encounters with others, and being able to talk about, gee, how do you want me, if we are to engage in any closeness, what will be the nature of that closeness? Like, we need to negotiate, talk about, are we ready for that? Should that happen? Do you want that? How how far away do you want me to be? How much do you want me to stay away from you or be
yeah,
close to you? I mean, we need to actually learn how to have those conversations, which really we're oftentimes not very good at. We human beings, we tend to shy away from talks about sexuality and sexual contact and touching and intimacy as
yeah.
being themselves um, difficult to engage in. So then these sexual drives and sexual impulses sort of build up over time, and people eventually maybe engage in an impulsive act that is harmful to others, and that gets them in trouble. And as you say, gets them labeled as a sex offender for the rest
Yeah.
of their lives. Then they have to struggle with, the consequences of that action.
And
So
sometimes
all
that's
about
not
the
even,
communication.
sometimes in situations that are not even justified. I've dealt with cases where the accuser exaggerates what happened, and for lack of evidence, or um, or a lack of defensive evidence for the victim, for the perpetrator, um, they get accused and they get sustained, and next thing you know, they're doing time for it, when it didn't really actually happen the way it was, explained. What do you do when you're labeled with that kind of, you know, a, have a stigma attached because of that kind of a label, and how do you recover with, a healthy, intimate life with someone after the fact? I
Yeah,
did some work with several people that have retrained, traumatized people that experience sexual trauma, and sometimes those experiences, the trauma is not necessarily from being the direct victim. There is trauma also to uh, the alleged perpetrators, who have to live their life being traumatized by an allegation that was not really true. Maybe the circumstances led to a conviction, but now they have to live with the trauma of being labeled. How do you regain, um, the opportunity to have a normal sex life after that, or any kind of intimacy after that? There
unfortunately, false accusations are relatively rare. I mean, we have a legal system that's pretty efficient in terms of separating
Yeah,
the wheat from the chaff in terms of what really happens from what is merely said to have happened. There needs
right.
to be evidence. There needs to be court proceedings. There need to be a jury. And I've been in many trials like this as a witness, um, who would testify in the course of these processes. And juries usually are pretty good at differentiating something that has merit from something that is in fact not real, and sort of allocating the degree of consequences in a manner that's more consistent with the actuality and the seriousness of the action
Mhm.
that is alleged to have occurred. So, yeah, so I think that's it. When someone does actually perpetrate a sexual offense and they are a sex offender, the acknowledgement of it, the willingness of it to get beyond denial. Many people who engage in what they consider to be shameful behavior tend to deny that behavior. So that's called denial. And it's hard to make progress in treatment if you don't openly acknowledge the behavior that you engaged in. And if you do, though, then you can begin to actually understand the effects of your behavior on the other person, on the victim. And so, one of the things that's an essential part of sex offender treatment is what's called victim empathy, understanding, really understanding what it was like for the victim to have been abused in the manner that they were in the course of a sexual crime,
Right.
which is one of the most degrading and painful things that a human being can experience.
Yes,
So, for the victim
absolutely.
empathy is really the perpetrator taking on, the level of responsibility for acknowledging, yeah, I caused that pain. I perpetrated this shameful act against this person because I chose to. I mean, I wanted what I wanted, and so I took it without the other person's consent, and therefore, they were harmed. And really acknowledging that and being able to see it,
Yeah.
admit it, and go forward is really the beginning of the foundation of sex offender treatment in these facilities that
You
treat
know,
sex.
you mentioned consent. Having consent, there are cases where the consent was allowed, but it wasn't enthusiastic consent. And yet, even though a person may be consenting, it has to be a full willingness, full enthusiasm with that. And I want to talk more about that when we get back. So stay with us. This is good stuff. Hang in there.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
Welcome back. So the big question is, what do you do to restore the opportunity for intimacy and that connection, and in your life as an individual and as a society? Audre Lorde wrote The Uses of the Erotic, reclaiming the erotic as power, which encourages us to reclaim the erotic as a wellspring of feeling, creativity, and deep knowing. And for some people, it's easier said than done, because when you even mention the word erotic, you have that, oh yeah, that's erotic. That means it's nasty, it's sexually related, and yada, yada, yada. And you have different schools of thought about that. But to name it as it is actually a healthy thing, versus the pornographic, where you don't even deal with the intimacy of human to human contact. So one of the things we need to reclaim, if anything, is the operative word here. Knowing the erotic is knowing that which is not simply sex, but it's a source of vitality, a wellspring of feeling. In a culture that treats pleasure as a commodity, reclaiming the erotic is an act of courage when you really think about it. Lorde, her vision frames the erotic as a birthright. It's a meeting point for pleasure, for creativity, and for care. So what it does is it embraces sensuality. It challenges isolation and shame. It challenges the furtiveness that takes place, and it also opens at the same time a path towards justice, connection, and communal flourishing, if you will. So the way forward, the way past that, lies in building communities that normalize and resource healthy touch. Fostering education, acts of solidarity, and honoring the wisdom of our bodies, somatic awareness, it allows touch to become a birthright, and it allows people access to that sensuality. So it's a catalyst, but not just for pleasure, not only for pleasure, but for justice and for authentic communication.
So one of the things I think you're talking about, Mike, is is reclaiming the erotic.
That's right.
The erotic, as you say, has been commodified in our society. It's a product that we use to gain people's attention, and then we sell them products, or we objectify women in order to get
and activism and different things like that as well. So with yeah, with those things in place, we need to take full advantage, of those opportunities, and take a risk every now and then, and allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to express ourselves. And before you know it, that kindness and that loving care, that a loving connection will invite the right people into your life, and the openness in our community for that kind of healthy connection.
Right. So the willingness to actually speak with another human being and negotiate with them about what would help them to feel more welcoming of the sharing of the erotic. The erotic impulse is that which kind of continues the human race. That's what contributes to our movement toward intimacy and touching in a healthy way
Yeah,
that's consensual and that actually allows us to create families.
yeah.
And so it
And that
certainly can be a very positive and sacred
that
thing.
will actually allow us to challenge the commodification, to a point where you're working with a consenting adult, working with people that are enthusiastic with each other, whether even as a community, the mindset, in the sexological bodywork community, they call it um, sex positive as opposed to sex negative. The idea that sex is a beautiful thing, that intimacy and intimate touch is a beautiful thing, which is worthy of a consecrated time and place, and worthy of the, you know, the consent and enjoyment that it inspires.
So it's interesting to talk about now how we're having a lot more discussion about that. I mean, we're starting to talk about sexual identity and people's
Mhm.
um, freedom to choose a sexual identity that they feel works for them. And that's something that you and I can remember being boomers was not done a whole lot in the past.
Oh,
You
for
were
sure.
kind of
Right.
you were born with an identity and that's the one that you were stuck with. And whatever feelings we had, that's that's the way it continued.
So,
Whereas, really psychologists like Carl Jung throughout history has understood that all of us really have masculine and feminine qualities within us.
okay.
And so
Perfect
we can
segue into
choose.
our next part three of our next series. We're going to be talking about gender, and how it plays in all of this, especially nowadays. Um, but we only have 1 minute left. I want to thank you all for being here. If you ever want to contact Dr. Murphy or myself, feel free. You go ahead and like and subscribe. And through this channel, you can get in touch with us, and we'll be able to give you more information as well. We got
So
one
my
more.
website is psychologicalinvestigations.com, and feel free to go there as well for information or to look at these YouTube videos and also to look at my book, Opioid Odyssey.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next week, same time, where we'll hit our final piece, part three of the many layers of sex in touch in modern life. Thanks again.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with host Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.